The night was supposed to be just another event, another gala with too many people pretending to care. But that was before I saw him. It was a room filled with gold and glamour, where laughter echoed off marble walls and crystal chandeliers shimmered above. But the second he walked in, the noise stopped. At least, it felt that way to me. My heart skipped a beat, not from attraction, but from the sudden, undeniable weight of his presence. He wasn't like the others in this room. He didn't need to speak loudly to be heard. He didn't need to introduce himself for everyone to know who he was. Alejandro Romano, Mafia boss. At least, that's what I had heard. But in that moment, standing there in his tailored suit, with eyes like a stormy ocean, he was more than that. He was a force. And I was just a waitress, a girl lost in the crowd, trying to make ends meet. I didn't belong in this world. I didn't belong anywhere near him. My fingers trembled slightly as I balanced the tray of champagne glasses, my mind still racing from the shock of his sudden appearance. I'd seen powerful men before, of course, but none with a gaze like his. None with a presence that could make everyone in the room step back, as though they knew to avoid crossing him. I had never met him before, yet it felt like he was already watching me. I shook the thought from my head. It was ridiculous. I was just a small-town girl, with dreams too big for this place. But even as I tried to focus on my task, my eyes kept drifting back to him. And when our gazes finally met, everything else in that room disappeared. His eyes locked onto mine, a look so intense I felt as though he could see right through me. He didn't say a word, just studied me with the kind of focus that made my chest tighten. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as though he knew every secret I had ever kept. And when he took a step forward, the room seemed to part for him, like the crowd had no choice but to make way. I should have looked away, pretended like nothing was happening, but I couldn't. It wasn't just his eyes. It was the way he moved, like a predator, calculating and confident. And then, to my surprise, he spoke. His voice was low, smooth, and when he addressed me, it was with the authority of a man who had never been refused. "You," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "You are mine now." The words hit me like a slap, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Mine? I was nothing. Just a waitress in a cheap uniform, standing in the middle of a room full of people who had everything I had ever dreamed of. But when he said that, I couldn't shake the feeling that he meant it, that I was already caught in his web, whether I wanted to be or not. As he stepped closer, I realized that the story of my life was about to change, forever. The tension in the room was palpable as he approached me. His every step was calculated, measured, like he was in complete control. I stood frozen, the tray of champagne glasses now a distant memory in my hands. His eyes never left mine, a steady, unblinking stare that made the air feel heavier, thicker. I could hear the soft hum of conversation around us, but it felt as though they were all fading into the background. It was just him, just his presence, and me. When he reached me, he stopped just a breath away. His eyes were cold, but there was something else there, something I couldn't quite place. Power, certainly, but there was also something protective in the way he looked at me, like I was something worth guarding. "You're not like the others," he said, his voice low, the words cutting through the tension in the room. I wanted to protest, wanted to tell him I was just a waitress, nothing more, but the words stuck in my throat. Something about the way he spoke, the way he carried himself, made me feel like I was in over my head. I wasn't prepared for this. I wasn't prepared for him. "What's your name?" His question was simple, but it felt like a demand. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, and managed to whisper, "Lily. Lily Green." He nodded, as if that piece of information was all he needed. I couldn't understand why he was interested in me. I was just another girl in a sea of faces, another anonymous figure. In a room full of people who would forget me the moment they left. But not him. His attention was unwavering, and I felt the weight of it, pressing down on me. "Lily Green," he repeated softly, testing the name on his tongue. "You don't belong here." His words weren't cruel, but they struck something deep inside me. I had never felt like I belonged anywhere, and hearing him say it out loud made that feeling even more real. "This is a world for people like me," he continued, his gaze now scanning the room. "Not for people like you." The way he said it made it sound like he was offering a warning, like I needed to be careful, but I wasn't sure if it was a warning I wanted to heed. I didn't want to be a part of his world. I had worked too hard to get where I was, too long to escape the past that haunted me. Yet here I was, standing in front of a man who made me feel like I was exactly where I didn't belong. He took a step back, his eyes still locked on mine, as though he was studying me. The silence between us stretched, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Something big. "I'll be watching you, Lily," he said, his voice low but firm. "Be careful who you trust." It wasn't a threat, exactly. More like an unspoken promise, one that sent a chill down my spine. He turned and walked away, his presence lingering in the air long after he had gone. I stood there, still holding the tray, my mind racing, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. My heart was pounding in my chest, a dull ache in my head, and I couldn't shake the image of his eyes, cold and calculating, as if he knew something about me that I didn't even know myself. What had just happened? And why did it feel like my world was about to change forever? The next few days were a blur of events that I couldn't make sense of. The gala had come and gone, but the memory of Marco's words still haunted me. "I'll be watching you, Lily." I had tried to push it out of my mind, but it was like a shadow that followed me, wherever I went. Every time I walked through the streets of Manhattan, I half expected to see him, watching from the shadows. But life didn't stop for me to figure out my confusion. I still had a job to do, still had bills to pay. So, I buried the thought of Marco Romano in the back of my mind, focusing on the tasks that were right in front of me. But then, there he was again. I was walking out of the small cafe where I worked part-time when I saw him across the street, standing in front of an expensive-looking car, his sharp suit like a black silhouette against the city lights. My heart skipped a beat as I froze in my tracks. Was he really here? Watching me? The wind picked up, and I wrapped my coat tighter around me, trying to ignore the way my palms had started to sweat. I didn't move, just stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, hoping that maybe, just maybe, he hadn't seen me. But he had. He tilted his head slightly, those piercing eyes finding mine across the street. And in that moment, I realized there was no escaping him. I tried to look away, to pretend I hadn't noticed, but his gaze was like a magnet, pulling me in. Without a word, he began walking toward me, his steps slow and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. My breath caught in my throat as he got closer, the air around us feeling colder. He stopped just a few feet away, close enough that I could feel the weight of his presence. "Lily," he said, his voice low and steady, like he hadn't been watching me all this time. "I didn't expect to see you here." The words hit me harder than I expected. It was like he was trying to make some kind of connection, like he had been thinking about me too. "I work here," I said, forcing myself to sound casual, but I knew my voice betrayed me. "I'm just heading home." He nodded, as if he understood. But then he said something that made my stomach flip. "You don't have to leave yet. I have something for you." My mind raced. What could he possibly want with me? Was he going to say something else, something more? Something that would change everything? I didn't know, but I couldn't bring myself to walk away. I didn't want to. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, unsure of what was about to happen. He smiled slightly, the corners of his lips turning up in a way that made my chest tighten. "It's a gift, but it's not what you think." The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. He handed me a small, black box, and my fingers shook slightly as I took it. "Open it," he said. I could feel his eyes on me as I slowly lifted the lid. Inside was a beautiful necklace, one that shimmered in the low light of the street. I didn't know what to say. I had no words. I wasn't sure why he was doing this, why he was giving me something so intimate. "I thought you might like it," he said, his voice softer now, almost like he was trying to tell me something without saying it directly. My breath caught in my throat. I could feel the weight of the necklace, like it was meant to symbolize something. But what? What was he trying to say with this simple gesture? "Thank you," I said, barely able to form the words. It was all I could manage. He nodded, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. We just stood there, staring at each other. And in that silence, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit before. Marco wasn't just a man who had watched me from afar. He wasn't just some powerful figure in my life. He was pulling me in, bit by bit, whether I wanted it or not. And there was no turning back now. The days that followed were a mix of confusion and quiet tension. Marco's gift, the necklace, kept me up at night, turning it over in my hands, wondering what it meant. Why had he given it to me? Was it just a gesture, or was there more to it? My mind raced with possibilities, none of them making sense. Each time I thought about him, I felt an uncomfortable pull, like I was being dragged into something I didn't fully understand. I had no answers, but that didn't stop me from thinking about him. He had invaded my thoughts, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was closer than I realized. I worked my shifts at the cafe, keeping busy, trying to ignore the weight of my thoughts, but every time I looked up, I half expected to see him standing there, watching me. I wasn't sure if I wanted that or not. One evening, as I walked home from work, I found myself on the same street where we had met that night. The city was quieter now, the lights dimming as the night crept in. The chill of the evening air nipped at my skin, but I couldn't bring myself to turn back. I kept walking, my footsteps echoing through the empty streets. That was when I saw him again. Marco was standing across the street, his figure illuminated by the soft glow of the streetlights. This time, he didn't wait for me to approach him. He crossed the street quickly, his long strides bringing him closer to me in seconds. "Lily," he said, his voice as steady as always, but there was something different in his tone now. "We need to talk." The words hung in the air, and I felt my heart skip a beat. Talk? About what? About me? About him? About everything that had been happening since we met? I wasn't sure, but I knew one thing. I couldn't walk away from this. "What is it, Marco?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. "I'm not sure what you think this is, but I want to make it clear," he said slowly. "I don't give gifts to just anyone, and I don't let people into my world unless I mean it." I felt a shiver run down my spine. His words, though simple, carried so much weight. I wanted to step back, to ask him what he meant, but the look in his eyes stopped me. There was something there, something intense, something that made me feel like he was speaking to me, but also to something deeper. "Why me?" I finally asked, my voice trembling slightly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the stillness of the night. "Because you're different," he said, his voice low, almost like a secret he was sharing. "And because I can't ignore what I feel when I'm near you." His words hit me like a wave, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just about a gift. It wasn't just about an encounter. This was something bigger, something I couldn't run from, no matter how much I wanted to. "I don't know what this means," I said, looking down at the necklace in my hand. "But I can't pretend it doesn't matter." He reached out and gently took the necklace from my fingers, his touch surprisingly soft. "You're not the only one trying to figure it out," he said quietly, his gaze never leaving mine. "But we will figure it out. Together." I wanted to pull away. I wanted to scream that this wasn't what I wanted. But I didn't. Because, deep down, I knew that I couldn't escape what had already started. And in some twisted way, I didn't want to. Marco Romano had become a part of my life, and there was no turning back. The days after that night felt like they were moving in slow motion, each moment stretching longer than the last. Marco's words kept echoing in my mind, and no matter how much I tried to ignore them, they stayed with me. "We will figure it out. Together." But what did that even mean? What was he expecting from me? I was still just a waitress, still just trying to get by. But Marco, he was something else. Something more. Something dangerous, powerful, and impossible to ignore. I found myself thinking about him more and more. When I wasn't at work, I kept finding reasons to walk by the spots where I had seen him, hoping I'd run into him again, but also dreading it. It was like I was caught in some kind of pull I couldn't escape. One afternoon, after a long shift, I was heading home when I saw him again. This time, he wasn't across the street, waiting for me to notice. He was standing right in front of me, like he had been waiting. I didn't even see him approach. "Lily," he said, his voice soft, but the command was there, as always. "I need to talk to you." There it was again, the words that made my heart race, that made everything else seem irrelevant. "About what?" I asked, my voice betraying the nervousness I felt. He smiled, but it wasn't the warm, reassuring smile I had come to expect. It was more knowing, like he was aware of something I wasn't. "About us," he said simply, and those two words hit me like a freight train. Us. What did he mean by that? Was there even an us? I had barely even begun to figure out who he was, let alone what this connection between us meant. "I don't understand," I said, my voice shaking a little. "You're not supposed to," he replied, his tone still calm, still assured. "But I think you will." I wanted to ask more, wanted to demand answers, but there was something in the way he looked at me that made it hard to speak. Something about his eyes, the way they locked onto mine, made me feel like he was saying more than just words. It was like he was revealing a part of me I wasn't ready to see. "I don't know what you want from me," I said, stepping back a little. "You don't have to know yet," he said, reaching out to touch my arm. The gesture gentle, but it still sent a wave of heat through me. "But you will. Soon." His touch lingered for just a moment before he pulled away, his eyes still holding mine. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away, just studied me, like he was weighing his next words carefully. "This is bigger than both of us," he finally said. "But I'm not asking you to understand everything right now. Just know that I'm not going anywhere. And neither are you." The finality in his words was unmistakable. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something, and no matter how much I wanted to pull back, I knew I was already too far gone. Marco Romano had a hold on me, whether I liked it or not. And the more I tried to push him away, the more I realized that maybe I didn't want to. Maybe, deep down, I was already where I was supposed to be. The next morning felt different before I even opened my eyes. It was not something I could explain, not something I could point to, but it was there, sitting heavy in my chest like a truth I was not ready to face. I lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling of my small apartment, listening to the distant hum of traffic outside, trying to convince myself that everything was normal. But it was not. Nothing had been normal since him. I reached over to my nightstand and picked up the necklace he had given me. The metal felt cool against my skin, heavier than something so delicate should feel. I turned it over slowly, watching how the light caught on its surface. That was when I noticed it. Something I had not seen before. A tiny engraving on the back. My breath caught. I sat up quickly, bringing it closer to my face. The letters were small, almost hidden, like they were never meant to be found easily. LR. The initials meant nothing to me. Or at least, they should not have. But the moment I read them, something inside me shifted. A strange feeling. Familiar, but distant. Like remembering a dream you cannot quite hold on to. I shook my head, trying to clear the thought, but it stayed. That quiet pull again. That same feeling I had whenever Marco looked at me. Like there was something just beneath the surface waiting to be uncovered. I did not have time to think about it. I had work. Real life. Something steady. Something safe. But even as I got dressed, even as I stepped outside into the cool New York morning, the necklace stayed in my hand, my thumb brushing over those two letters again and again. By the time I reached the cafe, I had almost convinced myself it was nothing. Just initials. Just a coincidence. Until I saw her. She was sitting at one of the corner tables, small feet swinging under the chair, a coloring book spread out in front of her. Maybe 6 or 7 years old. Light brown hair pulled into a loose ponytail, big curious eyes scanning the room like she was waiting for someone. There was something about her that made me slow down. Something that caught my attention before I even realized it. "Hey there," I said softly as I approached, forcing a smile. "Are you waiting for someone?" She looked up at me, and for a second, I forgot how to breathe. Her eyes. There was something about them. A color. A depth. Familiar in a way that made no sense. "My mom is working," she said, her voice small but confident. "She told me to stay right here." I nodded, glancing around, trying to spot who she might belong to, but the cafe was busy, and no one seemed to be watching her. "What are you drawing?" I asked, leaning slightly closer. She turned the coloring book toward me, but instead of a drawing, there was something else tucked between the pages. A photograph. Old. Slightly worn at the edges. My heart skipped. "I found it," she said, almost proudly. "In my mom's stuff." I reached out without thinking, carefully picking it up. The moment my eyes landed on the image, everything inside me went still. A younger version of a woman I did not recognize stood in the center, smiling softly. And beside her, my breath caught. Him. Marco. Younger, but unmistakable. Standing close to her, his expression softer than I had ever seen it. My fingers tightened around the photo. The room around me faded. The noise. The movement. Gone. All I could see was that image. And all I could feel was that same pull, stronger now, louder. The girl tilted her head, watching me. "Do you know them?" she asked innocently. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Because in that moment, I realized something I was not ready to understand. This was not a coincidence. And whatever I had just stepped into, it was about to change everything. My hand shook as I held the photograph, the edges of the paper crinkling slightly under my grip. The little girl's innocent question echoed in my mind. but I couldn't bring myself to answer her. My eyes were locked on Marco, younger but still unmistakable, standing beside a woman I didn't recognize. His expression was softer, less guarded, but there was a kind of familiarity in the way he looked at her, something I couldn't ignore. The room around me came back into focus, the hum of the cafe, the clink of cups, and the distant chatter of customers. But the noise felt muffled, as if I were underwater. "Do you know them?" The girl's voice broke through my fog, and I blinked, trying to steady myself. I was still holding the photo, but my mind was racing, a million thoughts swirling. I looked back at her, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "No, I don't," I lied. It was the only thing I could say, even though the truth was hanging in the air, just out of reach. The photograph seemed to burn in my hand. What was I seeing? Why was this photo here, in her hands, of a younger Marco with a woman I had never met? And why did it feel like this moment was one I would never be able to walk away from? I handed the photo back to the girl, my fingers brushing against hers as I did, and I tried to push the growing knot in my stomach down. "Are you sure?" she asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. "You look like you know them. You look like you're thinking really hard." I swallowed, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. "I'm just tired, sweetheart. You should be careful with other people's things, okay?" The words felt hollow, even to me, but she didn't seem to notice. She simply nodded, tucking the photo back into her coloring book. "Okay," she said, and then, without another word, went back to her drawings. I stood there for a moment longer than I should have, watching her, trying to piece together what I had just seen. I couldn't shake the image of Marco from my mind. The way he had looked at the woman in the photograph. There was something in that look, something that made my heart beat a little faster. I should have left. I should have walked out of that cafe and put the whole thing behind me. But I couldn't. I couldn't stop thinking about Marco. And the more I thought about him, the more questions I had. Why was he connected to this woman? Who was she? Was she someone important to him? And why was this photograph here, in the hands of a little girl who had no business being involved in any of this? I walked back to the counter, my mind still reeling. But when I reached the counter, I found myself facing a familiar figure standing by the door. Marco. His eyes met mine across the room, and my stomach dropped. He was here, and it wasn't a coincidence. He was here because he wanted to be. I could feel it in the air between us, the tension thickening. He had been watching me, I realized. Watching me the entire time. I felt a chill run down my spine as he took a step toward me, his gaze never leaving mine. "Lily," he said softly, his voice cutting through the noise of the cafe. "We need to talk. Now." The moment Marco stepped closer, I felt the ground beneath me shift. His presence was overpowering, and even though I wanted to retreat, something inside me kept me frozen in place. His gaze, intense and unwavering, held me like a magnet, and for a brief second, I wondered if he had always been this way, always pulling people into his orbit without them even realizing it. "Lily," he said again, his voice low, but now there was something different in it. It wasn't just commanding. There was an edge of urgency, like he was afraid I might slip away if he didn't act fast. "We need to talk. Now." His words hung in the air, the weight of them pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I wanted to ask him what was going on, why he was doing this, but the words didn't come. Instead, I nodded, too stunned to think of anything else. He led me out of the cafe, and I followed, my feet almost moving on their own. The cool evening air hit me as soon as we stepped outside, but it did little to shake the heat that had settled in my chest. Marco didn't speak as we walked, but I could feel the tension between us, thickening with every step. The silence was almost unbearable, and I found myself wondering what had happened to the man who had given me the necklace, the one who had seemed so sure of himself, so confident. Was this the same man? Or was there something more to him that I didn't know? We stopped in front of a black car, sleek and intimidating, parked on the quiet street. Marco turned to face me, his eyes softening just a fraction. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said, his voice gentler now. "But you need to understand something." I was silent, waiting for him to continue, unsure of what was coming next. "You're not just some stranger to me, Lily," he said, his gaze never leaving mine. "I didn't just meet you by chance. And you're not here by accident." I swallowed hard, trying to make sense of his words. "What are you saying?" I managed to ask, though my voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. He hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I'm saying that you're important. more important than you realize. And you're going to be involved in something much bigger than either of us can control. My heart skipped a beat. What are you talking about? I asked, the fear creeping into my voice now. You're in danger, he said simply. And I'm not going to let that happen. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Danger? What kind of danger was he talking about? I wanted to ask him more, but before I could speak, Marco reached into his jacket and pulled out something small and metallic. A phone. This is your new number, he said, holding it out to me. You're going to need it. I stared at the phone in his hand, still trying to process what he was saying. Why? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Because you're mine now, Lily, he said, his eyes darkening again. And I'm not going to let anything happen to you. I could feel the weight of his words in the pit of my stomach. I wanted to run, to scream that this wasn't what I wanted, but I couldn't move. I was trapped in his gaze, in his world, and I wasn't sure if I could get out. He handed me the phone, and I took it, my fingers brushing against his skin. The contact was brief, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. But I knew one thing for sure. My life, as I knew it, was over. And whatever was coming next, I was in it whether I liked it or not. The phone felt like a weight in my hand, almost too heavy for something so small. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to process everything Marco had just said. You're mine now, Lily. The words rang in my ears, echoing over and over again. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone back at him and run as fast as I could, but I couldn't. Something inside me, something deep and unexplainable, held me in place. Marco had given me a gift, yes, but it wasn't just any gift. It felt like a chain, invisible but strong, linking me to him in a way that I couldn't deny. I didn't want to belong to anyone, especially not someone like him. But here I was, standing in front of him, with the phone in my hand and no way to escape. What am I supposed to do with this? I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Marco's gaze softened for just a moment before he answered. Call me if you need anything. I'll be there. And don't go anywhere without it. Trust me, Lily, you don't want to be caught without it. I nodded slowly, still unsure of everything, but somehow understanding that refusing wasn't an option. I slipped the phone into my pocket, feeling its weight even more now. What's going to happen to me? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Marco looked at me, his expression unreadable. That's up to you, Lily, he said quietly. But I'll make sure you're protected. No one will hurt you. The promise in his voice sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't know what to make of him anymore. I didn't know what to make of any of this. But as I stood there, looking at Marco, I realized that there was no turning back. I was already tangled in his world, whether I liked it or not. I don't want this, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. Marco's eyes hardened, but his voice remained calm. I didn't ask you to want it, Lily. But you're in it now. You're a part of my world, whether you accept it or not. The finality in his words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but I couldn't find the words. Because somewhere deep inside, I knew he was right. I had already crossed a line, and there was no going back. Where do we go from here? I asked, the question escaping before I could think it through. Marco studied me for a long moment, and then, to my surprise, he smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile. It wasn't a smile of victory, either. It was something softer, almost reassuring. We take it one step at a time, he said, his voice gentler now. I'll be here, whenever you need me. But remember, you're never alone in this. Not anymore. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I simply nodded, my heart heavy with the weight of everything I didn't know. Marco turned